I used to think that survival was enough. I lived in a weathered two-story just outside Asheville, tucked between thick pine woods and the kind of silence only the forgotten can hear. The lavender I planted out front never really took. Still, I tended it every Saturday morning like it might bloom out of pity someday. I worked nights as a trauma nurse at Ridgeview General. The graveyard shift kept my hands busy and my mind too tired to remember things I'd rather forget. It helped. I'm 34 now. No husband, no kids, just me and Grandma June in the same creaking house where I grew up. After she had a minor stroke 2 years ago, I brought her to live with me. She's sharp as a hawk but slow as syrup now. I tell her every night to stop apologizing for needing me. She used to hold my hand through fevers, bruises, and nightmares. This is nothing. People at work called me steady, calm under fire, a sponge for other people's chaos. But they didn't know the reason I could handle broken bodies and blood was because I'd spent my entire childhood learning to silence my own wounds. My mother, Lorraine, liked to say I ruined things just by being born. She said it with a cigarette in her hand and a glass in the other. After she married Wayne Curlin, things only got worse. Wayne was a mechanic with fists like concrete and morals like a leaking pipe. He moved into our house when I was 9 and made it clear I wasn't one of his. I was a burden, a mouth, not a person. My mother agreed, loudly, repeatedly. When I turned 18, I left and never looked back. But every now and then, a memory would break the surface, a belt buckle. The sound of glass shattering at 2 a.m., the twist in my stomach when I heard the word family. I thought that part of my life was dead and buried. I was wrong. It started a week after I took Grandma June to a nearby beach for the day. She'd been cooped up for months, recovering, and I needed to remind her that beauty still existed. We collected shells with our feet in the tide, ate greasy crab cakes from a roadside shack, and shared a bottle of pink lemonade. She laughed so hard she cried. When I tucked her into bed that night, she whispered, "Thank you for making me feel like a person again." The next day, I got a call. "You had the audacity," Lorraine spat through the receiver, her voice soaked in venom. "To go play in the sun while your sister sat home feeling abandoned? How selfish can you be, Tessa? You always were." I blinked. "What?" Angela cried all night. "She said you left her out on purpose." Angela, the golden child, 10 years younger, same mother, different father, spoiled into oblivion with every ounce of love I was denied. My sister didn't call, didn't text. This was orchestrated. "Mom, I took Grandma out for the day. She needed air. You left us out of the lake trip. Remember that." And you think that justifies abandoning your sister? You think you're better than us because you play nurse and wipe old woman's drool off her chin? My jaw clenched so tight it creaked. Don't do this. Oh, it's done. Consider yourself disinvited from Thanksgiving, from Christmas, from this family. You burned your last bridge, girl. Then she hung up. I stared at the blank screen in my hand. Something in me, something small and quiet, snapped. It wasn't the loss I mourned. I'd never had a mother. Not really. I mourned the illusion that someday I would. That despite the bruises and silence and exile, I could walk away clean. Now I saw it clearly. This wasn't about Angela. It never was. It was about control. My mother hated when I lived well. She hated that I found love in places she couldn't touch. She hated that I had built a life without begging her for scraps. Wayne still ruled her house like a tyrant in a broken throne. She still let him. And Angela, she had learned from the best. I walked into the kitchen and sat in the dim light. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from something old and smoldering I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't that 15-year-old girl anymore, hiding bruises behind long sleeves and breathless apologies. I was a woman now, a nurse, a caretaker, a fighter, and I had just been declared uninvited from the family that never wanted me. Good. I didn't want their forgiveness. I wanted justice. Not the kind that came in courtrooms or confessions. The quiet kind. The kind that creeps in slow and coils around your breath until it changes everything. I'd spent years trying not to be like her, bitter, manipulative, cruel. I would not become her, but I also wouldn't be her victim. Not anymore. I stood up, my spine straight for the first time in years. I looked out the window at the dry lavender stalks, still stubborn, still standing. They thought they could erase me from the table. Let them. I was done waiting for scraps. Now I hungered for something else entirely, and I would make sure they felt it. Every single day. I'd been grounded a week when the cracks began to show in my little insurgency. At first, the annoyances landed like lightning bugs, sudden, harmless, and just enough to stir a little chaos. But something shifted around day 10. The house that once ignored me had now started to watch me. My mother's husband, Gary, the red-faced bastard with fists like bricks and a voice that could slice through bone, started lingering outside my bedroom door. I could hear his heavy breath through the thin wood. He was hunting for something, and I knew his gut told him it was me. It didn't take long for them to notice the missing garbage bags. My mother burst into my room without knocking. She always did that. "Where are the trash bags, Clara?" she hissed. I looked her straight in the eye. "I don't know." "Maybe they blew away with your conscience." Her slap cracked before I could brace for it. My cheek burned, heat radiating out like a bruise blooming under my skin. "You think you're clever, huh?" she snapped. "We're not idiots." "No," I muttered, rubbing my face. "You're just monsters." She stared at me for a beat. Then she smiled, not one of satisfaction, but something worse. Triumph. That night, I went to bed without dinner. Again. My grandmother smuggled me a heel of bread and some tea, her hand trembling as she passed it beneath my door like contraband. I kissed her fingers, whispered thanks, and choked back the knot in my throat. The worst thing about being treated like a ghost is that, eventually, you start to believe you are one. I ramped up my efforts after that. I waited until the dead of night to unscrew every light bulb in the kitchen, left them loose in the sockets so they wouldn't turn on. I added vinegar to the laundry detergent bottle and watched with fucking glee as my mother screamed the next morning about the rancid smell in her favorite blouse. But things didn't stay satisfying. One day, I came home from school, late because they refused to pick me up, and found Grandma sitting quietly on the porch, her knitting slack in her lap. "Gram," I asked, "you okay?" She wouldn't look at me. "They went through my room," she said softly. "Took the wipes and the plastic forks. Said I was helping you. That I was encouraging your behavior." My stomach dropped. "No," I whispered. "No, I didn't mean," they said, "if I lied for you again, they'd send me to assisted living." Her eyes met mine then. They looked older than I'd ever seen them. "Please, Clara, stop." She pressed a trembling hand to my cheek, covering the faint yellow smudge that still lingered from my mother's last punishment. That night, I didn't mess with the shower handle. That night, I cried like a child into my pillow, clinging to the sound of her footsteps retreating down the hall, her cane tapping like a ticking bomb. The next few days, I kept my head down. I walked through the house like fog. But the silence made me itch to do something, to regain whatever little power I'd felt. So I tried a new tactic. I stole their mail, not all of it, just enough to confuse them. A phone bill here, a dentist appointment reminder there. I left the envelopes under the porch, wrapped in a grocery bag, tiny acts, too subtle to trace. I told myself it was harmless. But harm has a way of finding you, even when you think you've buried it deep. One afternoon, I came home to find my mother waiting with her arms crossed, Gary looming behind her like a shadow. "You think we don't see what you're doing?" She spat. "The missing mail, the light bulbs, Grandma's trembling like a leaf. You think you're some kind of martyr?" I didn't say anything. I spoke to the school counselor, she continued. "Told her you've been acting out, that you've been violent, unstable." "What?" My throat tightened. "That's not true." "She believed me," she said, smiling her awful smile. "They all believe me, Clara. I'm your mother." "She's your mother," Gary echoed smugly. They stepped toward me. I held my ground, but inside I cracked. Later that week, the counselor called me into her office. "I understand things have been difficult at home," she said gently. "But if you ever hurt someone, Clara, even out of pain—" "I haven't hurt anyone," I snapped. And still she looked skeptical, like she was deciding where to put me, victim or problem. I left with a referral slip for therapy and a sick twist in my guts. They were poisoning my life brick by brick, lie by lie, and people were buying it. I stopped sleeping. My grades slipped. Grandma watched me with silent worry, but she didn't speak against them again. I didn't blame her. They'd found her weak spot, me. One night, while lying in bed, I whispered, "What if they're right?" My mouth tasted like ash. I tried to swallow, but the doubt stuck in my throat. What if I was broken? Vindictive? What kind of girl throws away the cutlery and lies to cause chaos? But then I remembered the lake trip. I remembered the way they didn't even pretend to miss me, the way they flaunted the photos, how my sister came back with a new swimsuit and sand still clinging to her curls. I remembered how no one thought I deserved to come along, not even for show. No, they twisted love into a weapon, and I was finally fighting back. Still, the weight of everything pressed down harder by the day. Then came the last straw. It was a Friday, pouring rain. I just got home soaked and exhausted when I heard raised voices downstairs. I crept close, listening from the landing. "She's out of control," Gary barked. "You keep coddling her, she's going to end up in juvie." "She's a stain on this family," my mother sneered. I should have let her father take her when he begged. I froze. My father had never begged for me, that's what she always said. That night I snuck into my grandmother's room. Her eyes were closed, but I whispered anyway. "Is it true?" I choked. "Did he ever want me?" She opened her eyes slowly. Inside them, something broke. "He begged to take you," she whispered. "He cried, begged, but she had full custody. I sank to the floor. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want you to hate her. Too late. It was in that moment on that faded carpet with the rain still hammering the gutters that I realized the truth had always been there, rotting quietly beneath the surface. I just hadn't been brave enough to see it. But now I did. And it shattered me. I didn't sleep that night. I stared into the ceiling while grief poured through me in hot, choking waves. They de-stolen more than my peace. They de-stolen my story, my chance. And suddenly, all the revenge in the world felt like dust in my mouth. It was quiet. Too quiet for a house that usually rattled with voices like slamming drawers. There was no yelling, no stomping, no banging of cupboards or barking demands. Just the hiss of the old radiator and the hum of distant traffic through a cracked window. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the spot where the last strip of paint peeled off the baseboard. My fingers curled around the seam of the blanket, pulling and bunching the threadbare fabric into my palm. I'd pulled every little string I had. Every cold shower, every unplugged appliance, every can without a label. I'd watched them stumble over the tiniest of inconveniences, and I'd laughed under my breath, night after night. I had thought that if I could just inconvenience them enough, if I could twist their lives into knots of frustration the way they'd done to mine, then I'd feel something. But now, all I felt was hollow. My grandmother didn't say much anymore. I think she knew what I was doing. She always looked tired in the mornings, like the weight of keeping her head down had finally pressed too hard on her spine. She never stopped me, never helped me either. She just made sure I had breakfast and gave me silence where love should have been. Maybe that's what hurt the most. I kept hoping they'd say sorry, that someone would see me. Even just a flicker of guilt in her eyes, my mother's eyes, but it never came. If I was a ghost in their house before, now I was just a shadow with a bad attitude. And still, even knowing all that, I kept trying to win battles that weren't mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there, letting the darkness smear across my walls until the smear became daylight again. In the morning, I heard them argue. Can't just lose that much money and not notice. Her husband's voice rattled the floorboards. I told you, didn't I tell you not to trust her with anything? I didn't give her anything. It's your fault for leaving it in the... My mother stopped herself too late. Wait, you left it in the desk? Are you insane? I stood in the hallway unseen, my back to the wall. The chill of it bled through my shirt. My fingers were ice. There was silence. Then the sound of the drawer slamming. It's gone, he said. His voice this time was not loud. It was flat. Terrifyingly flat. I swear I didn't. That was for rent, Gina. My mother didn't answer. That's when it hit me. Harder than any slap ever could. It wasn't just about control. It wasn't me they were taking it out on because I was weaker or smaller or just in the way. It was because they didn't know how to be anything else. They were broken people, masking their mess with a performance of power. And I had walked right into their play, memorized my lines, the rebellious scapegoat, the petty little brat. I had played that role well, so well I almost forgot I could walk off stage. They weren't going to change. They weren't going to realize what they'd lost until it was gone. But I could change. I could stop running in angry circles and finally take a step forward. For me. Later that week, I found the new notebook in my grandmother's dresser drawer. Leather-bound, untouched. She kept it under some old clothes, next to a hidden box of letters she probably hadn't read in years. I didn't take the letters, but the notebook, that felt like a sign. I started writing. Not stories, not fantasies, names, dates, events. Every time he hit the wall too close to my sister's head, every bruise blamed on a fall the size of a whisper. Every time my mother told me I was selfish for crying when they forgot my birthday again. I wrote down what they spent money on, what they said when they thought nobody would hear them. I tracked everything. I needed proof. I wasn't going to sneak around anymore. I wasn't going to unplug microwaves or hide forks like a ghost in the walls. I was going to light the damn house up with truth. I found a number in the back of a school bulletin, a place that helped kids in homes like mine. I used the phone at the public library so no one could trace me. They answered on the third ring. I need to report abuse, I said. My voice didn't shake. They asked me 100 questions. I answered them all. Then I waited. I kept quiet. I didn't make one more move, not until I knew what I was doing. I took pictures when I could. Video too. My grandmother didn't say anything, but she started saving receipts for the things she bought me. I think maybe finally she was siding with me. One day after school, I came home early and heard them in the kitchen. She's different, her husband said, suspicious. She's quiet. That's all, my mother replied, but her voice wavered. No, she's planning something. I stepped into the room. Their heads whipped toward me. The silence between us stretched like rubber. I said, his face twisted. Excuse me, I'm planning something, I said again. My voice was calm. But it's not for you, not anymore. My mother narrowed her eyes. What is that supposed to mean? You'll find out. They laughed. Of course they did. They thought I couldn't do anything. I was 15. I was just a kid in a house of shouting adults. But that night, I moved my grandmother's last bottle of blood pressure meds out of reach. Then I watched her look everywhere for it, and when I placed it back in her hand with a single word, noticed, she just stared at me. She finally saw what I was trying to show them all. I could make things disappear. But now, instead of disappearing spoons, I was going to erase something bigger. The silence of the house shifted after that. It wasn't passive anymore. It was wary, like they felt the storm coming. And I was done giggling in the shadows. I was the thunder now. I sat under the window that night, notebook in my lap, back pressed to the warmth of a heating vent. I ran my fingers over the stitched leather cover, rough, worn, but strong. I thought about the kid I was a month ago. Angry, petty, reactive. That wasn't who I wanted to be, not anymore. I closed my eyes. One last plan, not for revenge, for freedom. No fear, no turning back. I waited. Patiently. Quietly. Like the calm right before a hurricane slams into the coast. For weeks, I chipped away at their control. 1,000 little cuts, silent, subtle, maddening, but that was only the overture. The final plan required timing, precision, and something they never imagined I could have, proof. It had taken me months to collect, really. I started small recordings on my phone tucked under my pillow, screenshots of messages my mom sent when she thought no one was watching. I made copies of everything. Backed them up on 2 memory cards I hid in the spine of a library book under my bed. Her husband, Vince, always said, "No one's gonna care what a selfish little brat thinks. You're lucky we even keep you." His words, his favorite phrase, were now on tape. That and worse. I waited until the last week of my grounding. It was a Tuesday, mid-July, hot, thick air clinging to my skin like humidity had grown claws. I stood in the hallway, barefoot, listening to their voices in the kitchen. Vince arguing with Mom about a bill he forgot to pay, her accusing him of spending too much at the casino again. I slipped into the living room and flicked the television to Channel 8. I'd emailed the news director 2 days earlier. Attached the files. Voiced one line in the body of the message. They won't believe me, but they'll believe you. I didn't expect to hear back. But I did. They were airing the story that night. Local teenage girl exposes ongoing emotional abuse in her home. They'd blurred my name, my voice, but the recordings spoke for themselves. The words that had haunted me since I was 10 echoed out over the cheap speakers of a 32-inch flat screen. Vince's voice, my mother's laughter, my crying. Behind me, the kitchen went silent. "What the hell is this?" I heard him growl. My stomach turned, but I didn't move. The screen showed a photo of our house, the old white siding peeling at the edges. They had even filmed Grandma, sitting in her chair, hands folded in her lap, giving the quietest, strongest testimony I'd ever heard her give. "I tried," she said in the clip. "Lord knows I tried to protect her." I turned. Vince stormed in, his face red, spit caught in the corner of his mouth. "You little snake." Mom followed, her eyes wild, wounded like she was the one being betrayed. "You did this?" she hissed. I stood my ground, heart thudding, hands shaking at my sides. "Yeah," I said, "I did." Vince lunged, his hand grabbing for my arm, but Grandma was there before I could blink. She stepped between us like a storm wall, her cane pointed at his chest. "You touch her," she snapped, "and I'll drag your sorry ass to the sheriff myself." He looked stunned, like he finally realized something had shifted. The power wasn't his anymore. It wasn't hers either. It was mine. That week, Child Protective Services came. They walked through the house, asked the right questions. I didn't flinch. Grandma backed every word. The news story gave them no choice but to take it seriously. 2 days later, they removed me from the house. I sat in the back of a social worker's sedan, watching the shape of that old place grow smaller through the window. The porch with broken rails, the place where I learned to make myself silent. And I didn't feel sad, I felt clean. The foster home wasn't perfect. The bed creaked. The window had bars, but no one yelled. No one stole the food off my plate. I could breathe. For the first time in years, I could breathe. A week in, I got a letter from Grandma. Not a text, not a call, a letter. She wrote it by hand, her cursive shaky but alive. "You were always the strongest one, baby, the smartest. You didn't destroy them, you freed yourself. That's not revenge. That's survival." I held that letter tight against my chest that night, the paper warm from my hands and the salt from my eyes. 2 months later, I saw my sister. It was in the courthouse lobby during a follow-up hearing. She stood next to Mom, who didn't look at me, who acted like I was air. But my sister glanced over. She looked tired, not angry, just lost. I walked past her, but before the door closed, I turned back. "You still drawing?" I asked. She blinked, nodded. I hope you never stop, I said, and left it at that. We all lost something that summer. They lost control. The front they kept polished for neighbors and church folk cracked wide open. Vince got fired from his job at the auto shop once the story made its rounds. Mom had to answer questions she didn't know how to lie through. Me, I lost my fear. And in its place, I found something sharper, something stronger, my own voice. Years from now, I'll still remember the cold spray trick, the unplugged microwave, the chaos of label-less cans, but those were breadcrumbs. Noise. What mattered was standing up, not striking back. Sure, my revenge started with pettiness, but it ended with freedom, and that tastes better than any cold water scream ever could. I used to whisper my pain in the dark. Now I speak it in daylight.